6:12 hours, November 2nd, 1942. Stalingrad, western bank of the Volga. Ruins near the Red October factory. The air is below freezing. Powdered brick and concrete hang in the smoke like dust in a workshop. On the second floor of a collapsed apartment block, a 27-year-old senior sergeant lies motionless behind a broken windowsill. His name is Vasily Zaitsev, sniper of the 62nd Army. His heartbeat is slow. His right eye is fixed on a narrow strip of street 180 meters away, where German runners sometimes cross between two shattered warehouses. His rifle rests on a folded greatcoat over a chunk of masonry. To most of the Red Army, it is just a Mosin, Nagant M91/30 bolt action, standard issue, 7.62 x 54 mmR. 5 rounds in an internal magazine, loaded with a simple stripper clip. Wooden stock. Iron sights. A peasant rifle. The kind of weapon a conscripted farm boy could understand in 10 minutes. In Zaitsev's hands, it is something else. At 6:17, a shell from a German 105mm howitzer lands 300 meters away, near the Volga bank. The blast throws a plume of frozen dirt and ice into the air. The building trembles, but Zaitsev does not move. His left hand clamps the forestock. His gloved finger rests just outside the trigger guard. He waits. The street is quiet now. Somewhere, a Maxim machine gun barks in a short burst, then falls silent. Across the frozen rubble, Soviet infantry from the 1047th Rifle Regiment huddle in half-collapsed trenches and cellar holes. For them, this sector is just another slice of Stalingrad, one more grid square they have to hold at any cost. For Zaitsev, this stretch of street is something different. It is the hunting ground where, over the next 10 days, he will drop roughly 40 Germans with this so-called peasant rifle. 4 months earlier, none of this was planned. On July 17, 1942, the German 6th Army began its advance towards Stalingrad. By late August, Luftwaffe bombers had turned much of the city into ash and twisted steel. By mid-September, German infantry and armor had pushed into the northern suburbs and factory districts, turning streets, sewers, and stairwells into front lines measured in meters. The Soviets named it the defense of Stalingrad. The Germans called it the Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. At street level, it meant men fighting at ranges of 50 meters, 20 meters, sometimes 5. At 9:30, September 22, 1942, a small barge crossed the Volga under shellfire. On board was a petty officer from the Soviet Pacific Fleet, transferred from naval service to the army. He carried a rifle, some ammunition, and a hunter's patience earned in the Ural foothills. His name was Vasily Zaitsev. Before the war, Zaitsev had grown up in Yeleninskoye, in the Urals. As a boy he hunted wolves and deer with his grandfather, using old bolt-action rifles with iron sights and sometimes a simple single-shot shotgun. Range estimation, wind, and patience were not theory for him. They were the difference between bringing home meat or going hungry. The army had initially used him as a clerk in the Pacific Fleet. Only when the crisis at Stalingrad grew desperate did he get his chance to fight. He asked to be sent where he could shoot. The command agreed. At 11:05 that September morning, after landing on the West Bank, Zaitsev climbed the steep, frozen slope toward the city center with other reinforcements. German artillery shelled the river crossings constantly. Men dropped without warning. Nobody had time to grieve. At 12:40, he reported to a rifle regiment of the 62nd Army. They handed him a Mosin, Nagant M91/30. The rifle was nothing special on paper. Overall length, about 1,230 millimeters from butt plate to muzzle. Weight, roughly 4 kilograms unloaded, rising past 4.5 kilograms with a full magazine and bayonet. The action was a simple turnbolt with twin locking lugs at the front. The magazine held 5 rounds of 7.62 x 54 mmR, a rimmed cartridge developed in the late 19th century but still powerful enough to punch through a German steel helmet at several hundred meters. By 1942, many officers quietly mocked it. The Germans had sleek Mauser Kar 98K rifles and advanced optics. The Soviets had millions of Mosins, many produced by workers with minimal training, the wood sometimes rough, the finish crude. Soldiers called it the rifle of peasants and hunters. Zaitsev looked down the iron sights and knew it instantly. The balance was familiar. The pull of the bolt, the angle of the stock, the way the front post sat between the rear notch, It all reminded him of the hunting rifles he had used since his teenage years. For him, the peasant character was a feature, not a flaw. At 15:23 that same day, he got his first real shot in Stalingrad. The Germans were pushing near the central railway station, a key landmark in the heart of the city. The distance between opposing forces was a few hundred meters at most. Zaitsev, still just another rifleman, took position behind a broken fountain, his rifle resting on the rim. Two German soldiers ran across open ground toward a wrecked tram car about 250 meters away. He judged the distance from the size of their helmets in his sights, accounted for a light crosswind blowing dust from left to right, and squeezed the trigger. The Mosin bucked, the long barrel spitting flame. One German dropped. The second froze, unsure of where the shot had come from. Zaitsev worked the bolt, fired again, and the second man fell. 2 rounds. 2 kills. No scope. No spotter. Within days, his commanders noticed. By September 27, 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad had settled into a brutal stalemate. The Germans controlled most of the city's western districts. The Soviets clung to a narrow strip along the Volga, in some places only a few hundred meters deep. General Vasily Zaitsev, commander of the 62nd Army, understood that he could not match German artillery and armor inside the ruins. Instead, he needed to bleed them, one man at a time. Snipers became a central part of this strategy. At 8:10, October 1st, Zaitsev reported to a regimental commander who had read a brief report about his first weeks in combat. The file mentioned dozens of confirmed kills at ranges from 100 to 600 meters, all with a standard Mosin. The commander studied him for a moment, then handed him a new assignment: dedicated sniper duties. Sometime after that meeting, armorers fitted his rifle with an optical sight, often a Pu 3.5x scope. It was a compact, rugged optic designed for the same rifle. It weighed about 270 grams and provided a fixed 3.5 power magnification. The eye relief was short, the field of view narrow, and in low light it could be hard to use, but it allowed precise shots from cover at 300, 400, even 600 meters if the shooter knew his weapon. Zaitsev did. He knew how the heavy 7.62x 54 mmR bullets dropped with distance. At 100 meters, he could aim dead on. At 300, he raised his point of aim slightly above the target's belt. At 600, he allowed for nearly a meter of drop. Wind was trickier in the city, bouncing between walls and through streets, but years of hunting had trained him to read it from smoke and dust. From October 8th to October 18th, 1942, he and other snipers of the 62nd Army began working in organized teams. They used tactics that were simple but deadly. At 5:30 each morning, while the sky was still dark, they crossed rubble-filled courtyards to select buildings near the front. Once inside, they moved to attics or upper floors, smashing small firing holes through walls rather than using obvious windows. They camouflaged their positions with brick fragments, broken furniture, and cloth. A sniper team might consist of Zaitsev, a spotter, and a guard with a submachine gun. They waited. At 7 o'clock, as the first light rolled down the ruined streets, German soldiers would start their routine. Runners carried messages. Officers moved between command posts. Machine gun crews shifted their positions. Any exposed movement within 300 meters became a target. The Mosin's limitations shaped their tactics. With only 5 rounds in the magazine, rapid fire was possible but wasteful. Reloading under fire took time. Zaitsev preferred single, deliberate shots. He aimed at officers first, men with binoculars, radio operators, NCOs with MP-40 submachine guns. One precise shot could slow an entire platoon. The rifle's ruggedness was an advantage. It tolerated dust, brick, and snow. Even if the stock was chipped or the metal scratched, it still fired. In a city where buildings collapsed without warning, that reliability mattered more than polish. By late October, Zaitsev's kill count had risen into the dozens. Official Soviet sources would later credit him with well over 200 enemy soldiers killed at Stalingrad. But what mattered most in the autumn of 1942 was not the final tally, it was the effect on the enemy. German units began to fear open ground. Men ran crouched low. Officers stayed indoors. Every broken window became a potential danger. The 10 days that gave rise to the 40 Germans, legend began in this climate of fear. At 20:45, November 1st, 1942, a regimental staff officer summoned Zaitsev to a dugout near the front line, close to the Red October factory complex. The dugout's roof was made of logs and scrap metal, covered with earth. Kerosene lamps cast weak yellow light over maps spread across a wooden table. The commander pointed to a hand-drawn grid sketching several city blocks. German infantry had been reinforcing a line of buildings that screened their artillery observers. A particular street, about 200 meters long, lined with damaged warehouses, had become a corridor of movement for German corporals, runners, and small command groups. Over the previous week, Soviet scouts had reported heavy foot traffic through that corridor between 7:30 and 10 o'clock each morning, as the Germans rotated troops and delivered supplies. The Soviets did not have enough artillery shells to obliterate the entire sector. They needed a cheaper weapon, a patient sniper. The regimental commander laid out the task in simple terms. Starting the next morning, for as many days as conditions allowed, Zaitsev would deny that street to the enemy. He would not be alone. Other snipers would work adjacent sectors. But this particular corridor, this 200-meter strip of Stalingrad, would be his primary hunting ground. They expected him to kill officers, NCOs, and specialists, as many as possible, day after day. Zaitsev listened quietly. The numbers did not impress him. 40 Germans in 10 days. For a day. It was demanding, especially given the cold and the Germans' growing caution. But to him it was not a matter of statistics. It was a matter of selecting positions and trusting his rifle. At 22:05, he began preparing his kit. He checked the Mosin's bore with a dim flashlight, ensuring there was no debris. He worked the bolts several times to feel for any resistance. His PU scope's lenses were clean but not polished to a shine that might catch sunlight. He packed roughly 120 rounds, 24 5-round clips, in cloth pouches to mute their rattle. He took a simple entrenching tool, a knife, and a pair of field glasses. Sleep came in fragments. Between 2300 hours and 2 o'clock, German artillery hammered the Volga crossings. The ground shook. Men in the dugout clenched their jaws and waited out the barrage. Zaitsev lay with his greatcoat folded under his head, hands lightly resting on the rifle as if it were a talisman. At 4:10, November 2nd, he rose, slung the Mosin over his shoulder, and stepped into the darkness. By 5:02, he had reached the ruined apartment block that would serve as his nest for the day. The building's facade had been ripped open by earlier shelling. Staircases were partially collapsed. He and his spotter climbed carefully, avoiding loose bricks that could cascade and expose their movement. On the second floor, they selected a room whose outer wall was already half destroyed. Rather than use the obvious hole, they chipped a smaller firing slit in a sidewall with the entrenching tool, just large enough for the rifle's barrel and a narrow field of view. Dust filled the air. They worked quickly, finishing by 5:40. Zaitsev spread his greatcoat on the floor, then lay prone, the Mosin resting on a folded blanket over broken masonry. The scope's crosshairs settled roughly on the center of the target street. He adjusted the elevation turret for 200 meters. The air temperature was well below freezing, but the rifle's oil had been replaced with a thinner mixture that would not congeal in the cold. At 6 o'clock, the sky over Stalingrad began to lighten from black to gray. Smoke hovered over the ruins. The only sounds were distant explosions and the occasional crack of rifle fire from other sectors. At 6:12, his hunt began. Through the scope, he watched the empty street, counting seconds in his head to keep focus. He noted each minor detail: a shattered telegraph pole 30 meters from the left edge of his field of view, a crater 80 meters down the street, a broken cart leaning against a wall on the right. The first German appeared at 7:03. A single soldier in field gray, carrying a metal container, likely food or ammunition, stepped into the street from behind the warehouse on the right. Distance: about 180 meters. He moved at a brisk walk, glancing up and down the road, helmet low. Zaitsev exhaled slowly. The Mosin's crosshairs settled at the base of the man's neck, allowing for a slight downward angle from the second floor. He knew the 7.62 x 54 mmR round would strike slightly high at this distance, given his 200-meter zero. He shifted his aim a fraction lower. He fired. The 7.62 mm bullet left the 730 mm barrel at roughly 800 meters per second. It covered the 180-meter distance in less than a quarter of a second. The German dropped instantly, container flying as his legs buckled. Without speaking, Zaitsev worked the bolt. Spent brass clinked softly on the floor beside him. He did not fire again. The street went quiet. At 7:11, 2 more Germans appeared, moving cautiously, rifles ready. They crouched by the fallen man, trying to drag him behind cover. Zaitsev watched their shoulders, waiting for that fraction of a second when one would straighten, exposing his upper chest. He fired once more. Another man collapsed. The third dove behind a low wall, out of sight. 2 confirmed kills in the first 8 minutes of daylight. In the days to come, this pattern would repeat. Germans moving through the corridor, Zaitsev and his peasant rifle waiting in the shadows. Each shot would carry not only the weight of the bullet but the pressure of the larger battle around him. The fate of a city, the morale of exhausted Soviet infantry, the fragile myth that a simple, rugged rifle in the hands of a hunter could change the course of a war. But for now, at 7:19 on November 2nd, as he lay behind his crude firing slit, Zaitsev's world narrowed to a 200-meter stretch of Stalingrad and the cold wood of a Mosin Nagant against his cheek. 7:19 hours, November 2nd, 1942. Same ruined apartment, same cold firing slit. The street is empty again. 2 German bodies lie where they fell, one near the center line, one closer to the right-hand wall. Zaitsev keeps his eye in the scope, waiting for the next move. Experience has taught him that the enemy will try to recover their dead, even under fire. That impulse gives him targets. At 7:26, a squad of 6 Germans appears at the far end of the street, moving in a staggered file. Range: roughly 190 meters. 2 carry rifles. One has an MP40, another a light machine gun, likely an MG34 slung over his shoulder. The last 2 drag a tarp between them, the sign of a retrieval party. Zaitsev notes their helmets, the way they scan the windows. These are not careless men. They know a sniper is out there. The squad splits. 3 hug the left wall. The others move to the right, using doorways as intermittent cover. He studies each for insignia. The man with the MP40 wears an NCO's rank. The one with the machine gun is vital too, but the NCO directs them. At 7:28, as the squad pauses behind a small barricade, the NCO stands to signal with his hand. That brief exposure is enough. Zaitsev's finger tightens. The Mosin cracks. The NCO drops backward, arms wide, the MP40 clattering on the stones. Before the others react, he works the bolt and fires again, aiming at the machine gunner as he instinctively rushes toward his fallen leader. The second shot catches him mid-stride. He pitches forward, the MG34 tumbling away. The surviving Germans vanish into doorways. 2 bodies, and the original dead, remain in the open. The street becomes a narrow no-man's land, sealed by a single rifle. By 10:15, after several more cautious probes, the enemy gives up on recovering their dead in daylight. A Soviet runner reaches the building at 11:02 with a scrap of paper. The regimental staff has already tallied the morning's results. 5 confirmed kills in just over 4 hours. Day 1 of the 10-day hunt ends with the light fading and the temperature dropping. At 16:40, Zaitsev and his spotter silently withdraw, slipping down the shattered stairwell and across rubble to a cellar where they can rest. He cleans the Mosin in near darkness, running an oiled patch through the bore, checking the crown of the muzzle with his fingertip, feeling for damage. The wood is scarred, but the rifle's heart, its barrel and bolt, remain sound. He writes a simple note in his logbook. November 2nd. Sector near warehouses. 5 enemy. Rifle working well. The next morning begins the same way. At 4:48, November 3rd, he leaves his dugout, rifle and ammunition pouches already on his shoulders. At 5:27, he is back in the same building, but he does not use the same firing slit. That would be a mistake. German snipers and machine gun crews will have mapped likely positions. Instead, he shifts to another room, same floor, 8 to 10 meters to the left, and chisels a new slit through brick and plaster. By 7:10, he is in position. This time, the Germans are slower to show themselves. Sniping is a duel of nerves as much as marksmanship. The enemy knows the street is watched. They will probe with short, sudden movements, perhaps even send a sacrificial decoy. At 7:42, a lone figure runs across the far end of the street, back bent, moving at full speed. Too fast, too exposed. A deliberate lure. Zaitsev lets him go. At 8:03, A helmet barely creeps above a low wall near the right-hand warehouse. That too could be bait. He watches through the glass, counting breaths. In the doorway behind the low wall, a darker shadow shifts, someone standing just inside. That is his real target. He waits another minute, ignoring the flick of the helmet. At 8:04, the shadow steps out, revealing the upper torso of a man with binoculars. Likely an observer or junior officer. Range: 210 meters. Slight right-to-left wind, visible in drifting smoke. He holds a half-mil of lead to account for the wind and distance, then fires. The observer stiffens and collapses. The helmet decoy drops out of sight. The street is silent again. Through the morning and early afternoon, he repeats the cycle. Wait, detect, judge, fire. He might take only 3 or 4 shots in hours of watching. The Mosin's 5-round magazine is enough for this rhythm. Its limitation forces discipline. By 15:30 on November 3rd, the day's tally stands at 3 more confirmed kills. Combined with the previous day, that's 8 Germans in 2 days. From November 4th to November 6th, the pattern broadens. At 6:12, November 4th, he relocates to a different building overlooking the same corridor, about 80 meters north. The approach is more dangerous. Open ground separates his regiment's positions from the new hide. He crawls part of the way, rifle cradled in his arms, hugging craters and shell holes. In this new nest, a former office on the 3rd floor, he has a slightly higher angle, and the street appears shorter, compressed by perspective. The range now varies from 150 to 220 meters as targets move. He adjusts his elevation drum accordingly, sometimes dialing to 300 meters and holding low for closer shots. On November 4th he records 4 kills, 2 of them machine gun assistants carrying ammo drums. On November 5th, he adds another 3, including a radio operator whose torn headset dangles from the body as it falls. On November 6th, a runner with a document case, an NCO, and an engineer with a satchel charge all die in the corridor. By the evening of November 6th, the cumulative count in this sector reaches 19 Germans in 5 days. The effect spreads beyond the map square. German platoon leaders must find new routes, longer and more exposed. Messages take more time to deliver. Machine gun nests lack their second men. Minor shortages cascade into larger delays for an army already overextended in cold ruins. Technically, there is nothing exotic about what Zaitsev is doing. The Mosin Nagant is still the same rifle issued to millions. A front-locking bolt, a 2-lug rotation, a simple cruciform bayonet socket, which he generally leaves off when sniping to reduce barrel disturbances. The 7.62 x 54 mmR cartridge uses a heavy bullet, often around 147 to 182 grains, depending on the load. At 400 meters, it still carries lethal energy, but the drop is significant, over half a meter compared to the point of aim. In an open field, these ballistics demand careful range estimation with a rangefinder or reticle marks. In Stalingrad, the problem is different. Distances are short but deceptive. Smoke, angled streets, and shattered buildings distort perspective. Zaitsev resolves this by creating his own range map. Each evening, he sketches the corridor and the surrounding landmarks. He estimates distances by pacing them out at night or asking scouts who have crossed the street. The crater in the middle, 130 meters. The broken cart, 180. The door with the steel beam above it, 210. In his mind, the corridor becomes a series of known shooting lanes. He shares this with other snipers. To them, he is more than a single shooter. He is becoming a teacher. By November 7th, the 7th day of the hunt, the Germans respond more aggressively. At 9:17 that morning, after 2 hours of stillness, 3 shells from a light field gun crash into the upper floors of his usual buildings. Dust clouds the air. The enemy is not firing randomly. They have triangulated probable firing points from muzzle flashes and impact traces. In his current hide, a former stairwell landing, the blasts send plaster raining down. The walls shake. The PU scope's reticle swims for a moment in his eye. He clamps the rifle to his shoulder and waits out the shock. His spotter, pressed into a corner, counts the interval between shots. Roughly 20 seconds. After the 3rd shell, they move. At 9:24, staying low, they crawl down a half-collapsed staircase, cross a narrow, debris-filled alley at 9:31, and enter a different building that Soviet sappers had partially fortified earlier in the month. Within 30 minutes, they have a new nest, this time on the first floor, behind a slit cut at waist height. The adjustment saves his life. At 10:03, another shell hits his previous landing, blowing out the wall entirely. Chunks of brick and timber tumble into the street. At 10:11, as the dust clears, a small German team sprints into the corridor, likely expecting to catch him disoriented or dead. Instead, from a lower angle 170 meters away, the Mosin speaks again. 2 men fall. A third dives for cover, pinned down by a single rifle he thought was already silenced. By nightfall on November 7th, the tally increases by 3 more confirmed kills. The 10-day total now stands at 22. The mental strain accumulates with the numbers. Each night, around 2100 hours, in whatever basement or dugout he sleeps, Zaitsev opens his notebook and records the day's work. Date, sector, approximate ranges, type of targets. He does not write names. He does not know them. Just officer, runner, machine gunner. Once in a while, he notes something else. Enemy sniper, probably wounded or killed, when he fires at a muzzle flash and sees a rifle tumble from a window. He is not unaware that each line represents a human being. But Stalingrad does not give him much space for reflection. The city is burning, ammunition is limited, and the Volga crossings are under constant attack. His rifle and his logbook are tools in a larger system of survival. By November 8th and 9th, the rhythm of the corridor has shifted. The Germans start using night or pre-dawn movements for larger transfers. Daytime traffic consists mostly of single runners or small, fast-moving teams. Targets are fewer but still appear. On November 8th, he kills 2, both runners at roughly 200 meters, shot individually in short windows of exposure. On November 9th, he kills 3 more, including 1 man caught in mid-stride at 240 meters, one of the longer shots of the period. November 10th, the 10th day, brings the count to its legendary figure. At 6:54, November 10th, 1942, a light snow begins to fall over Stalingrad. The flakes mix with ash from distant fires, creating a dirty gray curtain. Visibility drops but does not disappear. Through his scope, Zaitsev sees the corridor in softer focus, edges blurred by snow. Snow helps and hinders. It muffles footsteps, allowing him to move slightly more freely to adjust his position. But it also diffuses light, making it harder to distinguish uniforms from background. At 8:12, a German squad appears at the far southern end of the corridor. 5 men, 2 with shovels, 1 with a roll of telephone cable. They intend to lay a line under partial cover of the snowfall. Range: about 210 meters. Zaitsev waits for them to commit to the open ground. At 8:15, 2 kneel to start digging a shallow trench across the street. 1 stands, hands on hips, supervising. Through the scope, the rank is clear, a non-commissioned officer again. He fires. The NCO drops. The 2 diggers freeze. 1 bolts, running back the way he came. The other heaves himself into the unfinished trench. Zaitsev fires a second time, catching the runner in the back. The remaining men, telephone cable abandoned, retreat behind the warehouses. 2 more marks in the tally. At 10:32, another opportunity. A field kitchen wagon, drawn by a horse, clatters into view from a side street, escorted by 3 soldiers. Food is as important as ammunition. Hungry men fight poorly. For a moment, Zaitsev considers the horse. Killing it would immobilize the wagon, but he chooses the escorts instead. He fires once at the lead soldier, dropping him. The others panic, trying to reverse the wagon out of the kill zone. In the confusion, 1 slips on snow and falls. A second shot takes him as he scrambles. The remaining man manages to get the wagon into cover, the horse's hooves scattering snow and brick. By 1300 hours, the corridor has claimed 4 more Germans. The final shot of the 10-day stretch comes at 15:47, as daylight fades. A German sniper, or at least a marksman, has been harassing Soviet positions from an upper window overlooking the same street. His rifle, likely a Kar 98K with a 4-time scope, barks at intervals, each shot answered by curses from Soviet riflemen pinned behind low walls. Zaitsev studies the building. The enemy has broken a small notch in the wall, similar to his own firing slits. The muzzle flash is faint. The angle is tight. Range: around 260 meters. From his lower firing point, he cannot see the shooter directly, but he can see a sliver of wall where the muzzle flash briefly appears. He estimates the shooter's head height behind the wall and aims not at the hole itself but slightly to the side, where the man's temple might be when he leans forward. He waits for the next German shot. When the flash blooms, he fires almost in the same instant. A second later, a dark shape lurches into view, then hangs halfway out of the firing slit before sliding down, leaving a smear on the broken masonry. The enemy rifle clatters into the street below. The Soviet infantry in the nearby trenches cheer. The corridor falls silent. With that, the informal period that his regiment would remember as those 10 days ends. The logbook entry for November 10th notes 5 kills. The running total since November 2nd comes to roughly 40 Germans. One man, one so-called peasant rifle, 10 days. The battle around him does not stop. Days later, on November 19th, 1942, the Red Army launches Operation Uranus, a massive encirclement of the German Sixth Army. From Zaitsev's vantage point, the change comes in small signs: fewer shells from some directions, more rumors of German units cut off, a shift in the tone of officers' briefings. He keeps working, now sometimes ranging beyond his corridor, supporting assaults or defending newly won rubble. His kill count continues to rise. By the end of the Stalingrad campaign, official Soviet records will credit him with over 200 enemy soldiers killed, plus several enemy snipers eliminated in duels. On January 22, 1943, weeks after the 10-day stretch, his contribution is recognized formally. Word reaches him in a cold dugout that he has been nominated for, and then awarded, the title Hero of the Soviet Union and the Order of Lenin. The decorations are symbolic compared to the daily reality of ruined streets, but they cement his name in military reports. Only a few days later, in late January, a mortar shell explodes near his position. Shrapnel strikes him in the face and eyes. At 14:30 on that day, his world goes white. He is evacuated across the Volga, eyes bandaged, uncertain if he will ever see again. In a hospital far from the front, surgeons remove fragments from his eyes. For a time, he is nearly blind. The Mosin, Nagant, the corridor, the ruined buildings, all of it recedes into memory. But gradually, after operations and recovery, sight returns in one eye, then the other, enough for him to function. The war moves on without him at Stalingrad. By February 2, 1943, the German Sixth Army surrenders. The city is a skeleton, but it stands. After recovery, Zaitsev's role shifts. In mid-1943, he is assigned to help form and train new sniper units, passing on the lessons he learned in the factories and streets of Stalingrad. He teaches them how to choose positions, how to dig firing slits that do not betray their location, how to map an urban landscape with distances and reference points. He explains the Mosin's idiosyncrasies, the way the bolt sometimes sticks in dust, the importance of consistent cheek weld on the stock, the specific sound of a rimmed cartridge feeding cleanly. His approach is methodical. He emphasizes camouflage, patience, and economy of fire. He tells young snipers that 3 good shots in a day can be more valuable than 30 wasted rounds. By 1945, as the war ends, he holds the rank of captain. He has gone from a hunter of wolves to a hunter of enemy soldiers, then to an instructor shaping others. Millions of Mosin, Nagants will remain in service for decades, in Soviet hands and abroad. Many of the men using them trace their practical doctrine, directly or indirectly, to snipers like him. In peacetime, his life looks different. After demobilization, he does not retire into legend immediately. He studies and works in industry. 4 years, he serves as a manager at a factory. Accounts differ whether it is a textile or engineering plant, in the Ukrainian SSR, living in relative obscurity compared to his wartime fame. He marries, raises a family, rides trams and walks streets where no one is measuring distances for shots. But the war is never entirely gone. In later decades, he publishes memoirs, including detailed notes about Stalingrad and sniper work. The Mosin Nagant, once just a peasant rifle in official tables, appears in his pages as a complex tool, limited, crude in some respects, but deadly effective when matched to a trained eye and steady hands. His story feeds into Soviet and later Russian military doctrine for snipers. Training manuals emphasize concealment, observation, and independent decision-making, Concepts tested on the streets where he lay behind broken windowsills in 1942. Sniper schools use his examples as case studies, analyzing how one shooter can influence a sector far beyond his immediate field of fire. Museums in Volgograd, the renamed Stalingrad, display rifles like his long, wood-stocked Mosin Nagants with PU scopes mounted offset above the bolt. Some exhibits claim to show his actual rifle or one of the rifles he used. Whether or not each display is authentic, the idea is clear. The weapon once dismissed as a peasant's gun is now framed in glass as a relic of a decisive battle. In 1991, Vasily Zaitsev dies at the age of 76. Years later, his remains are reinterred in Volgograd. At the ceremony, a Mosin Nagant lies near his grave, its worn stock and metal bearing the marks of years. It stands less as an object of technical fascination and more as a symbol of a certain kind of war. Close, merciless, decided in meters and seconds by men who could turn simple tools into decisive weapons. His legacy is not in the number 40 Germans in 10 days, though that phrase survives as a convenient summary. The real legacy lies in how those 10 days and the months around them changed the way armies think about precision fire. Before and during the early years of the war, many commanders saw rifles as mass weapons, lines of men firing volleys, or squads spraying bullets to keep heads down. Stalingrad showed the other side. One man, one rifle, deliberate shots that cut the nervous system out of a unit, its messengers, its officers, its machine gun crews, at relatively low cost in ammunition. Modern doctrines for designated marksmen and snipers echo this lesson. They do not require exotic weapons. Even as newer rifles and optics replace the Mosin Nagant in most armies, the core principles remain the same. Know your weapon, know your terrain, pick your targets carefully, and understand that a single bullet placed at the right time can shape a battle far beyond the small circle of its impact. In the end, the Mosin Nagant remains what it always was, a simple bolt-action rifle built in immense numbers, with no special magic in its steel and wood. The difference at Stalingrad was the man behind it. They called it a peasant rifle. For 10 days in November 1942, on a ruined street near the Red October factory, Vasily Zaitsev showed that in the hands of a patient hunter, that peasant rifle could lock down a corridor, sap the strength of an enemy army, and tilt the balance in one of the most important battles of the war.